Evan Drellick from The Athletic joining us right now to talk about some pretty interesting topics that were released last week via articles from Evan. You can check those out in The Athletic right now. Evan, great to see you again. Let us start with the two stories you released on Jim Murray, who is a longtime player agent, who is also, I'll say it, a mole, a rat, whatever you want to call it, and that has been exposed. What else can you tell us?
This was a years-long investigation that the MLBPA started really in September 2023. There was a previous case where Jim Murray's former firm, which is Excel Sports Management, it's run by Casey Close, who's the agent to Derek Jeter, basically sued, but you have to do that in arbitration according to the agent guidelines, sued this other agency that Jim Murray left for, WME Sports, which has now gotten out of baseball. And they won big in that case, Excel Sports Management did, and showed that Jim Murray and another agent there had broken their contract when they left for Excel for WME. One of the things that came up in that case was an email between Excel Sports Management agents right after Jim left, where they're saying, what side is Jim on, the owners or the players? And someone, an agent at Excel, accuses him of being a mole. And in the following 2 years here, starting September 2023, the MLBPA gathers all this evidence, text exchanges, emails, conversations that Jim Murray was having with Commissioner Rob Manfred, Deputy Commissioner Dan Halem, a bunch of other lieutenants at MLB, Noah Garden, Morgan Sword, Pat Courtney, who's the head of PR and communications, where Jim is essentially funneling information and trying to bargain on behalf of players. This is the way the PA portrayed it. When that is supposed to be the job of the union. Agents in general, I think if you step back, people think, well, they're on the player's side of the fence. And what the PA found here is that they had an agent who was basically acting as a double agent, who was giving during very sensitive bargaining times and negotiations in 2020, when the sport was trying to come back from the pandemic and there was a whole fight over how much players should be paid. There's one text message that stands out where Jim Murray texts Rob Manfred and says, don't give in to what the PA is trying to do. And the PA in general is trying to maximize what players are paid. And so it's really this microcosm and an extreme example of the infighting and politics that can exist amongst player agents, the dislike that they can have for the union. And it is, he's not the first agent who's ever dealt with the league. And that was the league's statement on this, was this is somewhat routine. I think the nature of what Jim Murray was saying, certainly compared to anything I've ever seen covering the sport, really stands out as extreme, as an example of going behind the Players Association's back.
What I mean, I know he got banned, didn't he? He got banned from being an agent, but he can still work as an agent. Is this the worst? I know you just said it's the most extreme, but maybe I should phrase this differently. He got banned, but he didn't really get banned. He can do marketing, but he can't do the whole thing. Is kind of. Can you explain that a little bit more? And then, is this the first time that this has ever happened? Because I find it hard to believe that this is the first time that somebody's tried to go behind someone's back in a union, like such as the MLBPA, to try to get basically money from the commissioner down the road.
Well, there was another agent who was recently decertified. That was the Remus Sports case. And he's not the first agent to have his right and ability to be an agent taken away. And there is some nuance here. As you're asking, AJ, let me explain it. The MLBPA, the players union, certifies player agents. If you are going to negotiate a playing contract on behalf of players, you have to be certified with the union. And there's a whole set of guidelines that you have to follow. And if you don't follow them, the PA can essentially bring charges, and that doesn't go into a court of law. That goes in front of an arbitrator. The PA reached a settlement with Murray in this case, where he is decertified for 4 years. He cannot negotiate a playing contract. He cannot make money from a playing contract. So this is the very core function of an agent. He is not totally barred from engaging with players. There are 4 players who he can give advice to, 4 guys that he had previously, that he's still able to talk to that way. And he can also still do marketing. And there is some money that comes in through marketing. So it is not a total and complete break between Murray and the agenting business, but the settlement agreement, so the agreement that the union and Murray signed, is several pages long. there's all sorts of other conditions that have to be met and restrictions that are on him. He can't, again, own an agency. If he gets back involved, he's got to pay an additional $150,000. He's already fined $100,000. Any agent who is working with him, any player that's working with him in the future, has to sign off that they've read this agreement. They put shackles around him without totally and entirely saying you can't ever do anything in this sport again. But for 4 years, he can't do the main function of an agent. So it is quite extreme. It is not the most extreme outcome you could have imagined, but I think after 2 years, the union and probably Murray's camp as well felt it was time to move on.
Also, seems kind of crazy that a player would read this and then be like, "Oh yeah, want to represent me? You like me?" Because there's some explosive back and forth here that people can read in your article. I'll just bring up a couple notable parts. And I think this is important, Evan, that we're going over this because there's already distrust, severe distrust between both sides. This does not help the cause. And for fans listening, they want to know, hey, are we just going to keep playing ball? We don't want all this lockout crap. This doesn't help. So one part I want to bring up first is why would Jim Murray do this? And I'll pick out a part from your article about him lobbying to sell advertisements via uniform patches. This is a direct text quote to Noah Garden, who handles a lot of the business for MLB. Quote, Rob Manfred is going to talk with you about the patch thing and me/us helping. Parentheses, therefore, I can maybe get a paycheck. So I think that's one explanation as to why someone like this would do that. One other that I'll bring up that stood out to me is how he was, I would say, pretty vocal about his hate of the side that he's supposed to represent. In June of 2020, Rob Manfred's right-hand PR guy, Pat Courtney, asked Murray how are players, and Murray's response was, F the players. I'm still so pissed off. I can't see straight. We need them to be pissed at their leadership, was the reply from Courtney. So what are your thoughts on some of the reasons why someone like this would go rogue?
Yeah, reading this letter of discipline, notice of discipline that the PA sent out to its executive board. So that's the 38 players who get to vote on major union affairs. Is pretty jarring. You don't see this level of detail in terms of internal communications, the way agents or league officials would talk to each other. It's very wild stuff to see. And what's in the story is really only a small slice. And as I understand, what's even in that 71-page letter of discipline is only a small slice of what the union came across. Why someone would do this, I think currying favor with the league can do a few things for an agent, right? If you're able to tell a player that you're recruiting that you are in the middle of these decisions, that all roads or some really important roads run through you, that's a pretty powerful recruiting tool. And I think some agents say it, whether it's true or not. But if you can kind of position yourself as above the fray, as exceptional in the eyes of the league, that helps you potentially in your business. And obviously your players presumably wouldn't see these types of communications. And the reality of agenting is that, agents have different types of clients. When the union is fighting for what it perceives to be the greater good overall, Jim Murray has clients who might believe, because he encouraged them or otherwise, that it is not for the greater good. You asked about the patch question. These larger agencies, Excel being one of them, have different divisions of business that do sponsorship marketing deals with the league, and the lines there get very blurry. And this is something that the union has tried to enforce in other areas to some success. But you can have an agency that is representing players in one lane, and then in another lane is doing sponsorship marketing, patch deals, what have you, with the league. And I think it's not a leap to say that there can be some perverse incentives here where the marketing side is going to want potentially different things than what the player side is going to want. And in this case, you had a player agent crossing that line himself directly. So it's this window into the complexities and truly inside ball of union politics, of the agent in union politics. It's a very complicated and layered situation, and it's ugly.
Some of this we're talking about opinions. You bringing up a lot of facts. Is there a legal, because we have strict labor laws when it regards to unions, is there a legal ramifications that will come out of this, not just for Jim Murray, but also for, fair contract negotiations that are supposed to be brought to the table? And we have people going behind the back from one side to the other. So is there anything legal from either side, from Jim Murray's side, or even from Commissioner Manfred and Major League Baseball?
I think the only answer I can give there is to be seen. Certainly, I wouldn't expect, if the union believes that there was some sort of greater violation committed here on behalf of the league, for them to disclose it to me before they've brought a case. Right? They kept this thing relatively quiet. I'd caught some wind of it previously, but didn't have enough to report it until they were done, basically. And there was a hard document that went out, and I was able to obtain it. But I don't know. I don't know if the commissioner and his lieutenants engaging with a player representative that way is in any way impermissible. Certainly the league's position, spokesperson Glenn Kaplan went on the record for this story and described this as routine, and also felt like this was kind of settled business, right? There were grievances that the league and the union both filed against each other regarding these 2020 negotiations. So what was in question here with Jim Murray got narrowed down to what did he do during the pandemic time, and the league's position is that that's all settled business. We had grievances, we agreed to resolve them, and I assume their argument would be that you can't then bring further litigation regarding it, and the way that would work in the same way that if there's an agent issue, it goes to arbitration. That's what would happen with the league and the union as well. They have their own arbitration process. It would be a grievance, right? We've heard that term before. So I don't know if there'll be further action off of this, but I suspect the union is considering all of it.
Evan, one more on this, and just also I spoke to some agents anonymously who've been around for a while and asked them if they felt like that statement was accurate, if this was normal, and they obviously laughed hysterically. Like, I would never, ever go to those lengths. Of course, there are communication going on, an agent sees the commissioner at the ballpark, whatever. That's all cool. This is crazy. So to give one more example here, and again, I'm just trying to represent fans and say, hey, how does this affect us? Well, here we go. Back in 2020, this is in there from your article, Jim Murray, who we're talking about here, the rogue agent who turned into a mole, wrote to Rob Manfred directly, quote, "Please do not give in regarding the MLBPA proposed October language. You will get the deal done without it." And in your article, you wrote the union was trying to put flexibility in the schedule for additional games, thereby increasing potential player earnings. The union wrote in the documents, which were obtained by The Athletic in your report. So how do you think that affects fans? I mean, that's the part I'm trying to get to. Is we go back to 2020, I remember being pissed, like, can we just play ball? There's so much fighting going on. You've got a guy on supposedly on one side of the spectrum telling the other side, like, don't give in on this one, hold out.
Right. I did 6 years ago already an oral history of the 1994-95 strike, and there was an agent, I don't know if he's called Ron Shapiro, one of the pronunciations there, who described the role that agents had during that 1994-95 strike of shuttling information. And he acknowledged that the Players Association at the time didn't like it. And so I think there's nuance here of agents are always back channeling to some degree. It is hard to imagine that many agents would be so clearly in the bag for management, for the owners, and not for the cause of the union, and unions and agents do play different roles, and they have a symbiotic relationship, and it's complex, where the agents are concerned about their guys and their own interests, and the union is supposed to be something a little bit more pure, where you are supposed to be advocating on behalf of the entire membership and making decisions at the guidance of your 38-player executive board, that are good for all players. And so, an agent trying to essentially play negotiator, there is a federal labor law element here that is pretty straightforward. Of the union is the executive board is a designated negotiator for the players, right? It is not. I don't think anybody would argue the job of a player agent to negotiate a labor deal for players. They negotiate playing contracts. They don't negotiate labor deals, but they have great influence over the players that they represent. And so I think to your question, how does this impact fans? It adds a whole other layer of complication to negotiations that are already complicated. It's not just owners versus owners on management side, and then owners versus players. It's agents at times versus players versus union. It's sometimes people ask me, "What's my job?" It's really baseball politics, and this is as kind of extreme an example of politics gone awry, certainly from the perspective of the union, as I've seen.
Evan, you also wrote another story about the Players' Way. Can you talk a little bit about the Players' Way and how this became a story also? Because this, I mean, is it under investigation now because of the way it was handled? What's the deal with the Players' Way?
So this story, yes, I basically wrote a summary of ESPN's story. They did a good job, Jeff Pass and Don Van Natta Jr., of reporting this. I did not have this story. There has been, as has been previously reported, an ongoing federal investigation into officials at the MLBPA and also at least one other sports union, the NFLPA, where we've already seen the head of the NFLPA, Lloyd Howell Jr., has resigned. When this first came out, there was a lot of focus on this licensing company that the MLBPA and the NFLPA together own a combined 2/3 of, called One Team Partners. And they do deals with Fanatics. And there was a long story I did about their board and how they at one point moved to try to grant themselves basically equity. The complication here when you have these companies that are owned by sports unions is that, to what degree should labor law apply is a question that lawyers and federal government have to sort through. But there are all sorts of requirements that labor unions have that outside businesses don't. Who makes decisions, transparency, et cetera. And so basically you are held to a different and understandably higher standard in many cases than an outside business would be. And the union has this arm that's dedicated to youth sports called Players' Way. And this is a pet project of Tony Clark's. And the ESPN report, in summary, is there's been a bunch of money that's gone in there. And they had two anonymous sources questioning, where is this money gone? Where is it? How is it being used? And it all, to some degree, stems back or ties back to this anonymous complaint that was submitted to the National Labor Relations Department last year. And this complaint was then sent anonymously to reporters. The federal government now, the Department of Justice, seems to be going through some, or at least some, if not all, of the different things that were listed in this complaint about Tony Clark and the operation of the MLBPA. And this is, it's a very difficult thing for the MLBPA to have to deal with when you're now probably just months away from collective bargaining. You have the possibility, anytime you have the DOJ involved, there's at least the possibility of a federal indictment, that could be brought forth against Tony or any of the other officials there. And it hangs a cloud over everything. And we'll see if indeed the federal government finds that there's reason to move the case forward. But it is a serious development, and something that ultimately, if it does lead to an indictment, if it does lead to some sort of change in leadership of the union, could have great impact on collective bargaining. And it's no small matter.
Is it deeper than just, a Tony thing? Is it a brute? Are there the people that are under investigation? Is it always in this case leadership? Because to me, there's a lot of pieces that there's a lot of players or ex-players that get involved with the Players' Way or different arms of different things. So is it just a leadership that the FBI, the federal investigation would be focusing on?
And you're right. FBI is the right term here. The FBI
Okay.
is the one looking into this, and the prosecutors are the U.S. Attorney's Office, and it's out of the Eastern District of New York. I think the intuitive answer here is they're going to look at everything. If you're the federal government, this is a relatively high-profile case, right? And the job is to vet anyone and everything with this and see if it lines up with applicable law. And that can take a very long time. There's no real expiration on this as far as I know. And the Eastern District of New York has not commented at any point, but if money is being wrongly used or wrongly allocated, or if it's being done in a way, if it's being allocated in a way that's not really in line with labor law, any number of charges could be brought. But this is a one thing to explain here. This is a very unique situation where you have a labor union operating other for-profit business arms. Typically, labor unions don't do that, right? This is relatively unique to sports, and it's something of kind of new ground where the MLBPA and the NFLPA, they all had outside counsel advising them. This would be within labor law. This wouldn't be within labor law. Even if you make those efforts, it doesn't mean you're necessarily always going to step perfectly. And so, we'll see. Is there an indictment? Is the indictment, if there is one, something very serious, or is it something that players would overlook and say, we can live with this? But the requirements around spending money, transparency at a labor union, there is an annual financial disclosure form that the union has to file every year. Major League Baseball doesn't have to do that, right? There is a higher requirement in place for labor unions, and we'll see if they follow the letter of the law.